Hello, and welcome to our workshop. This workshop was previously delivered by SMU's Academic Learning Services Writing Center. As a result, you may hear references to other workshops, be prompted to take part in group activities, or hear references to the active chat from the original delivery of this session. As you follow along, feel free to pause the video and participate in exercises and activities as best you can. We hope you enjoy the workshop.
All right. So hi, everyone. Welcome. Today's session, just as you see on the screen, is reading to write. So we're going to be taking that kind of that critical analysis lens and applying it to how we can efficiently read, especially with academic articles, academic readings that you're going to be doing throughout your university career, essentially. And so it's important to not just be able to efficiently read and figure out how to find information and sort it, but also to connect it and to apply it as well, to make those connections in our writing and to make those connections in the way that we are presenting our information in our writing, right? So we want to be able to effectively read, efficiently read, not spend hours just sitting reading through a chapter, for example, in our textbook, or reading through an article that as we're doing research, for example, and then we end up not really using it. So it's important to figure out how we can find information, see if we really need this topic or we need this paper that we're using for our paper, and ways to apply it as well. So I am going to just move on to the next slide. And just as always, if you have any questions or anything that you want to say, you can unmute yourself, or feel free to drop it in the chat as well. So before we get started, essentially, so just like I said, I really want to be able to think of ways to develop methods of sorting information. We'll see some examples of what that looks like. We'll talk about how to actually read effectively and efficiently. And then we'll actually break out into groups and then discuss the paper based on Dr. Kirley Freeman's lecture, which I'll put in the chat as well. And you'll have an opportunity to kind of apply that reading style, and you'll find that within 10 minutes you'll be able to find a lot more information than maybe if you were to just sit there and read that paper from cover to cover. And then we'll find ways to connect and to draw those conclusions about what we're reading. So before we get started, I do want to initiate a poll. And so how do you approach reading an academic article or text? What's the first thing you do? So I hope you're able to see that. But what is your approach to reading an academic article when you first get it? When you're first searching for it and you find it, how do you know that, how do you kind of start out? Do you just read it cover to cover, like brute force reading? Do you read the abstract first if it's available? Do you read the intro and the conclusion, or do you just skim through it all looking at the headers? What's your approach? And again, there's no wrong answer, and this is anonymous, of course. We'll give you a few more seconds to answer, and then I'll end the poll. Okay, so I don't know if I'll be able to see it after I end it, but essentially right now reading the abstract is almost tied with skimming through it all. And then reading cover to cover is and reading the intro and conclusion are a little bit less at 17% and 12%. I'm gonna end the poll now. Okay, so you can see the results. So reading the abstract first is the winner. And so going through that's an excellent way to do it. And we'll be discussing kind of an approach that you can take to read efficiently. And then you have right after skimming through it at 30%, which is also a great tactic as well. And then like you see here, reading the introduction and then reading cover to cover is less. So that's interesting to see. Interesting to see that most of you are taking that approach of looking at the abstract. So let's get started into the session. So what's the approach that kind of, when you get an academic article, what's a method that you can take to save you some time, especially when you're asked to do research and you're looking and filtering through so many different articles. You sometimes find that you read through a whole article and realize this doesn't really apply to your work, your research, what you're writing about. And sometimes it's good to just be able to use this approach to get through and fully understand an article without sitting there for hours on end, going through a chapter or a paper, and then thinking, okay, I can't actually, I didn't really actually retain anything. So how can we read efficiently and effectively? Just quickly. All right. So the first thing that you want to do is read the abstract. So this is great if it's available, and I know most of you chose that as an option of what you do, which is great to hear. So what I want is for you to look at the abstract first and go through it in a way that is clear and to understand the beginning of the article and understand it in its full information. So with an abstract, you have the little bit of the intro, you have some methodology, you have what's being said, you have what the results were, as well as the conclusion in most cases. And so reading the abstract initially, 1 or 2 minutes after reading it, you really know what's being said about the entire paper. And you really can gauge, okay, I do want to continue on with this or I don't. The second thing, moving on to the introduction and the conclusion. So in this, the introduction holds a lot of context. It holds a lot of information of what to expect, why this research or this work is being done. You also are able to determine what the research goals are, what is being said, why it's being said, as well as what's to be expected in this paper. And sometimes the hypothesis is given. And moving on to similarly the conclusion or the discussion, sometimes it's called, you notice that you get the essentially what was found in the paper. You are able to see, okay, based on these results, this is what the researcher concluded. So it's really great to look at the intro and the conclusion to get, again, a little bit more context and see what the results were. And then sometimes that can really help you decide, okay, this paper is kind of on the right track, really fits into my research. And on the other side of it, you also get a lot more information about what the paper is about so that you can understand it a little bit better than going through that brute force reading initially. So you're able to pick up on key information without really going, without sitting there and reading it in a kind of page by page, and you're able to really determine, okay, this is what this paper is talking about, and you get again, larger idea of what's being said. The third thing, moving on, and again, we'll see an example of what this looks like. But going on into the note headings or the subheadings, this is really good for what we call selective access. So if a paper has headings, which most articles will have some sort of, whether it's saying these are the results section, this is the conclusion, or if it is by topic as well. So with your note headings or subheadings, you're able to see, okay, this is what this paragraph is going to be about. I can go through and see, oh, are they covering this topic? You can kind of pick and choose and see, okay, I want to read more on this. You can also see, by reading the subheadings, you can see what the paper is covering from the beginning paragraph to the end. especially if it is by topic as well. And through this, again, the whole purpose is to save you time so that you really fully get the scope of what this paper is covering, to determine A, I want to continue reading it, or B, this paper really fits what I'm saying. Further along, again, kind of in the same idea, going into number 4, making sure to read the first sentence in each paragraph. So with each paragraph, within the topic sentence, that first sentence generally will give you an idea of what the paper is going to say, or what the paragraph is going to be about. So with that, even further, you get a glimpse of not just the headings, but a little bit, again, a little bit of context for each paragraph about what it's going to be talking about. Sometimes a topic sentence will just be a statement, and then the rest of it will be supporting facts. Sometimes it'll just say, and it'll pose a question, or in this paragraph, this is what will be discussed. So again, further on, you are expanding your knowledge of that said text, and you're able to, again, garner some more information, give yourself a little bit more context into what's being said. And you're also, you're able to, while you're going from 1 to 4, steps 1 to 4, you are finding information that was maybe that you would brush through if you're going initially, if you started reading from the beginning to the end, just in one, in that brute force reading style. You're able to kind of see what's being said. You're able to maybe annotate, draw some conclusions while you're reading in this way. And then number 5, you want to make sure that you're reading, again, after you do those steps 1 to 4, that you're going through and reading from beginning to end. You always want to make sure that you are fully reading a text. Even if you find one piece of it, you want to make sure that you're giving yourself that context as well. Steps 1 to 4 are a really good way to a vetting process. If you are going through many papers, it's a really good way to determine, okay, I want to keep this paper or I don't. And at the same time, also, it's a good way that even if you do want to keep a paper and you're reading it, to read it in this process, since it enables you to, like I said, find some key information, really fully understand what's being said. Sometimes that gets lost when you are reading and sitting from beginning to end. You're going into it by step 5, having a lot of context and having an idea about what's the topic and what the author's stance is. And then number 6, again, you want to, especially depending and on the length of a paper, reading it multiple times is a great way to go through and highlight, underline, annotate, really draw those connections, whether you're doing it on your computer or you're doing it by hand, to really understand and remind yourself, okay, this paragraph is really important, putting a star by it, this really circling and saying this really relates to what I want to, my argument and what point I want to make. So this is really a good way to, again, depends on the length of the article you're reading or the chapter, and the time you have as well. So through reading and through research, really give yourself some time. Give yourself ample time to sit down and thoroughly read through before you actually start the writing process. Because most of writing is that reading, is understanding a text, and then being able to sit down and apply it to your own writing. So just keep that in mind as well. I'm just going to check the chat quickly. Okay. Introduction. Yeah, definitely. And you can do this for nonfiction. It doesn't just have to apply for academic articles, for sure. That's a great point to bring up. And just like we do in books when we're just reading, even just for leisure purposes, just looking at the back, determining, oh, this is what this book is about. We do it all the time, and then just saying, okay, I do want to read this, or I don't want to read this. Looking at the synopsis, or sometimes you get a prologue that you can read through and get the gist of what the book is about. So definitely this can be applied to that as well. So let's practice together by looking at this for a second. So when you are looking at a paper, I think the first important thing to see is an obvious thing to think about is the title of the article or the book. You get a lot of information from that. From just looking at this, for example, we're seeing engaging youth in disaster risk reduction and resilience in Canada. So right off the bat, we know it's about youth. We know that it is about disaster risk reduction, and it's in Canada. So we know the location, the audience, what is being talked about. We also have an idea of when it was published, when it was sent out for review, when it was accepted. We also know where it was published, who the authors are. And these are important things to note right off the bat when you are doing research, when you are looking for articles, because you can look up who the researcher is. You can see, okay, has Robin, for example, written any other articles on this topic that you can use for a paper? With the title, you can see what it's about. And a lot of times looking at the title, you can determine whether to move on with the paper and to get a lot of information about it as well. Again, our favorite little section, the abstract. Within the abstract, I know we talked about this, but within the abstract, you are able to really break it up into its component parts. This specific abstract doesn't really give you the full scope of the paper, but it gives a nice intro, like a nice little synopsis similar to that in the back of a book, where it gives you the context. So here it's setting up that there's risks associated with disaster and climate, and it's escalating. So it's giving us some background information. And then it's going into the history of it, again, some more context, talking about who the population is. So youth have been recently recognized as having potential as change agents in their communities and stakeholders. So this is very much in favor of youth and the movement and making changes for DRR policies. And then going on further to talk about who the target, specifically 15 to 24-year-olds, and then telling you what the paper is going to explore. So within reading this, if you were to sit and read this, it might take you a minute or two. And you really will understand the focus of the paper, the audience, the background, why it's being done, and what is going to be explored in this paper. You also get some keywords. A lot of times you will find that papers will include the keywords or about youth engagement. Here it's about disaster risk reduction. They're going to cover climate change. So you have a little bit more of an idea of what's being said.
Hi, Amanda. I have a quick question from a student here.
Yeah.
Ethan just asked, what's the main difference between the abstract and the intro?
So the abstract, good question. The abstract will, nope, that's not what I wanted. The abstract will generally give you, especially in an academic article, will generally give you the full paper. It'll give you a little bit of the intro, some methodology, results, and the full conclusion of what was found. In some cases like this, it gives you a synopsis, similar to giving you context, and then what they're going to be looking at and why they're looking at it and what the paper will explore. So in this case, this seems similar to an introduction, but of course within your intro, you're going to have a lot more in-depth detail of why this research was done, the context. It's going to go into a lot more detail, and it narrows down into the experimental design, how they tested this, how they researched this, and then further into what they expect to see. And sometimes it'll say they expect to see this. They'll give a full hypothesis of what their expectation is based on their current background research. So again, in the biggest difference is that the abstract is just a snippet of the full scope of the paper, whereas the introduction is leading you into the importance of the research, leading you into the experimental design, why the research was done, and then going narrow into the research question or the hypothesis. I hope that answered your question. Let me just check the chat really quick. Okay, awesome. All right, so next thing is looking at the headers. So looking at, again, like we talked about, no, that's not what we talked about, looking at the introduction and the conclusion. So that's your next step. The introduction, again, like I said, will give you that context, the background of the experimental design, narrowing into the research question, as well as the hypothesis, or the anticipated result based on the literature review. Similarly, the conclusion, again, will lead back to the context. You'll find that the research done in the introduction is used in the conclusion to really either support or to negate what was being studied in the body of the paper. You find out what it is that they found based on their research. You can see here, recognize, where am I looking? Especially in disaster risk due to changing climate. They are ready to have systems and institutions beyond seeing youth engagement merely as a checkbox. So you see that based on this research and based on the methodologies, they found that they're beyond seeing youth, and then they'll go and explain why. So in these 2 points, or in these 2 sections, again, you're further giving yourself more understanding of the paper, and giving yourself into these sections that are specifically telling you about the context and specifically telling you about what was found. The third thing, or fourth thing, is what are youth saying about engagement in DRR? So understanding what youth say about their engagement in disaster risk reduction. We know right off the bat, this is what's being discussed. If we were looking for this specific topic, we'd be able to find it because of the selective access. And then understanding, if you're looking at the topic sentence, so right here, understanding what you'd say about engagement for DRR provides valuable insight into the gaps and opportunities of youth idea skills and implementing innovative DRR solutions. So you know what this paragraph is going to talk about from looking at the header and the topic sentence. And you are able to fully understand a little bit better, especially longer texts, because of this breaking it up into sections and going through it initially that first time. Oh, yeah. So moving on, once you've gone through that process and have actually read the paper, it's important, even during those smaller steps from 1 to 4 that we talked about, is sorting the information. So it's important to read it, to understand it, but also to know the significance of it, and to be able to really critically think about the sorting method. So if you do have I should have asked you this in the beginning, but if you have a pen or paper beside you, just to make note of these 5 things, you don't need to put the definition, you can if you want, but having the topic, issue, author's position, evidence, and evaluation, and knowing that as you're going through your paper will really help you, again, further understand, for example, the topic, what is this paper about? The issue, what's happened to provoke this research? Why is this research being done? What's the author's position on it? What do they think about the evidence? What's their interpretation of it based on their own research and their context within the paper? What evidence do they provide for you as the reader? How are they proving their point? These are all important things to make note of as you are going through, even through the skimming phase of reading a paper, and being able to evaluate and determine, are you convinced by what you're reading? Why or why not? What did the author really provide enough information for you to really see why they believe in something, or why they interpreted the evidence in one way? And so having this and understanding that in this context is important for you to know, to later apply in your writing. So if you're reading in this manner, you're sorting, you're trying to understand what's being written and putting things into these categories, you end up, before you even put pen to paper or fingers to the keyboard, you have so much more knowledge going in based on what was said. And so going into it, you can see in a second, we'll be going into our breakout groups. And I really want you to go in and sort through this paper, Charlie's War, The Life and Death of Black South African in Canadian Expeditionary Force. This was based on Dr. Kirley Freeman's lecture, and I'll be putting it in the chat in a second. But what I want you to do is really to, going back to this, sort your information in groups and think about this process that we went through, this quick process of reading through a long article, and going through and seeing if you can find information on the topic. What was the topic? What's the issue? What's the position? What was the author's evidence that they provided? And what do you think of it? What's your evaluation of the paper? And as a reader and as an expert in a topic, and as you're doing research, you become, it becomes almost second nature. The more that you do it, of course, it becomes second nature, and you find yourself able to sort the information a lot more efficiently. You're able to determine what the issue of the topic is, what the evidence is. And so I want to give you the opportunity here to do that. Awesome. So what do you think the topic is based on what you saw, or applying those reading things, or those reading? Yeah, perfect.
So I would say the topic of, so basically just based on the initial title, basic first page.
Mm-hmm.
What I would assume the topic to be about the service of that particular individual
Mm-hmm.
in the expeditionary force.
Yeah.
Expeditionary force, and basically I would expect it to be a summary of his service, his life, and what that entailed.
Yeah, exactly.
And what the scenarios were.
100%. And you're able to see a lot of that and a lot about what's being said just from that little paragraph, for sure. So the next thing, what's the evidence, or why is this research being done? Were you able to see that? Or maybe I'll give you a second to go through.
So I think why the research was being done was because he had a bit of a different story, being originally from South Africa, which was quite unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And just the circumstances of how he was killed in World War I.
Yeah.
I think it was that the context to it,
Mm-hmm.
that led to further research being done.
Yeah. And even maybe looking at also the migration, and going through, even now, if you go through the different topics and the subheadings, you'll be able to see even the what her evidence was, why she felt this way, how the different how he was treated in his cohort as well,
and the side effects of that treatment.
Yeah, exactly. And based on his race, and based on so many different things and how migration comes to play into it. So go through, and I encourage the rest of you to share your thoughts on those different topics, the topic, the evidence, author's position, and try to go through the paper in an efficient manner, and then, yeah, and have those discussions. So I'm just gonna hop into another group, and please continue the conversation. Great, see you for now.
Okay.
How's it going?
Going through half of it now at the author's position.
Awesome.
So far.
What have you found about the author's position? Do you know?
I read in the abstract, I read from the second paragraph.
Mhm.
So like I won't read it again just because it will take up the group time.
Yeah.
But it just like the last part of it is talking about the experience of Black soldiers in the Great War, including those who served in the number 2, and that racism and imperial anxieties were defining features of the war itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, this article argues that a transnational imperial frame reveals how the violence and racism of imperial shaped the experience of Black soldiers in the Great War.
Mm-hmm.
So that's her position, and that's what she believes, and that's what she is going to try and convince us in this article.
Yeah, awesome.
And then for like the evidence, a lot of it is like the headings.
Yeah.
Like the first heading like talks about it opens up with like him being stabbed and like on the logging road, and so that's the evidence.
Yeah. And a lot of the evidence too is in having like the pictures and the medical records as well, and being able to, even the historical context too. That's a huge implication of seeing how other Black soldiers in these different cohorts were treated as well. So yeah, definitely great work. I'm just a couple more minutes and then I'll end it. So I'm just going to jump into another group and see how they're doing. But yeah, keep the conversation going. How did you find it? How was the reading process?
I think it was good. I think we were mostly going off of like our previous readings and through the lecture.
Yeah.
And we just spoke about like what we remembered, the topics and the issues that were posed and whatnot.
Yeah. Did you find going through did you go through like the abstract first, or did you go through like the headers and then the different paragraphs, or what was your approach?
I think a lot of it was mostly like just our discussion on it, not so much as focusing on the actual rereading of the article, but as we remembering what we had read, and because we had all gone through it before, and we're like, okay, so what do you guys think of this topic or this issue that was brought up during it?
Yeah,
I think is more what we went through.
Really try to apply this kind of this sorting method when you are reading, even if it's not actually to having it written down, even in your head, maybe highlighting and saying, okay, this is the topic, this is the evidence. And so by doing that, we're able to, once you sort it, you're able to apply that information. And I saw that in some of the discussions that you were kind of talking about the concepts and what it meant, what the author's evidence suggested, the context of the story and of the issue at hand. And so in kind of the final thing, just to close it off, before you form an opinion, make sure you fully understand the data or the research or what's being said. And in doing that sorting method, you're able to get a glimpse of what's being said. And by reading an article, you're not just looking at the summary, but as the paper as a whole, the context and the methodology and the author's analysis. And so as you are doing this, try to make those connections. And like I said, putting in that work beforehand when you are reading, it might seem a little bit tedious, or you feel like, oh, I could be writing during this time. But believe me, if you do put in that time beforehand, by really sorting the information, giving it context, applying it to, okay, what does this mean? If Charlie's migration, Charlie Som's migration, what are the implications of that racially? What did that have to do with his death? Was it related? And so drawing those conclusions as you are reading and thinking of the context that's provided, you're able to then be more informed on the topic. A simple abstract, even though it gives you a nice glimpse of what's being said, doesn't give you the full picture. And so you want to be able to read through those sections and then ultimately go through it from beginning to end. And by doing the first part, those steps 1 to 4 that we talked about at the beginning, you'll find that reading through, you have a lot more information and it's a lot easier to read through this paper, especially longer pieces of text. And so once you put in, it says here that first 40% of writing, that research, usually the first 40% of time isn't writing. It's just reading, analyzing, making connections, and then so that when you sit down to actually write your paper, you're a lot more ready. You've already made those connections, so you don't have to read paragraph, then go to type a little, look back at the paper, type again a little bit. You're much more informed and you're coming in with a lot more context and a lot more analysis and information as well. And so ultimately, how does this information, when you are reading, relate back to your argument or thesis statement? How does it support the claims? So make sure that you're looking at the information that's being provided, like the evidence that Dr. Kirley Freeman provided, the texts, the context of how Black soldiers were treated during the war, how they were, what was the context in France, what the animosity between French and the Canadians in that context as well, and in that time historically. So again, how is the information provided relating back to that argument or thesis statement or author's position? And how does it support the claims? So make those connections, analyze what's being said, and relate it back if you are writing a paper, relate it back to your topic, or how does it connect with your topic? Again, with reading, it's so important to understand and glean some information from it, but being able to sort it, being able to really critically see what the author's position is, what the evidence suggests, what the topic is, ultimately to decide and evaluate the paper is so much more rewarding and so much more effective as well in your reading process. And you'll find that your writing will improve as your reading processes like this improve as well.